Hello guys, welcome to my new juniors. For everyone else, how are ya? So today I'm going to be doing the review theory portion for chapter 11. If you guys want to follow along in your textbook, it is on page 224. So this chapter comes right after the nail disorders and diseases chapter, which is what you would have studied when you were a freshman. So, to be honest, this is not the most exciting chapter in the book. However, it is very important that we understand different properties of the hair and the scalp, just because that's kind of the realm that we're working in. So, we need to know things like what the cuticle is, what a hair follicle is, things along those lines, right? Because, say, for some reason, a client had something that looked funny or something, we just have to be able to know. It just kind of gives us a better understanding of everything. And also, too, just like the texture of people's hair, things like that, just allows us to do our job better as well. So, right off the bat on page 224, I would like you to highlight the definition of trichology, which is the scientific study of hair and its diseases, and the care of it as well. So, we do know for my junior 2 and 3s, the previous chapter that we talked about, or the previous unit, we did chapter 6, which is the anatomy. So hair, skin, and nails, and the glands that actually like create the oils and stuff are part of the integumentary system, which we talk about in chapter 6. So different structures of the hair root. So the hair root is actually that little teardrop shaped thing it's underneath the skin, right? And then the hair shaft is the actual part of the hair strand that we see and that we deal with. So that's the difference between the two. A lot of these words, I feel like, that start with hair, like the hair follicle, hair root, it gets a little bit jumbled up. So just remember, hair root is under the scalp, kind of like roots from a vegetable would be. And then the hair shaft is what's going to be on the outside. That's what we're actually dealing with. So over on page 225, I would like you to highlight the definition of the hair follicle. So it is the tube-like depression or pocket in the skin or the scalp that contains the hair root. So we have follicles all over our body. They're obviously going to be a little bit larger on the scalp. The only parts of the body that we don't have follicles is on the palms of our hands and the soles of our feet. Because you've probably noticed throughout your life, like there's no hair on the palm of your hands. That's actually going to be the pocket that holds the hair root, right? So then we have the hair bulb. So that's going to be the part that's underneath. If you've ever done waxing or tweezing, that's going to be that little white tip that has the black bulb in it. Okay, that's the hair bulb. And then we have the derma papilla. So if you want to highlight that definition as well, it is a small cone-shaped elevation located at the base of the hair follicle that fits into the hair bulb. The derma papilla contains the blood and nerve supply that provides the nutrients needed for the hair growth. That definition, you'll just need to know that as well. And then the erector pili muscle is the small involuntary muscle at the base of the hair follicle. So this is going to be that muscle that actually gives us goosebumps or goose flesh, whatever you call it. And I like to share this with students. I had a student ask me one time if bald people will get goosebumps because I don't know how she came up with that question, but the answer is no, they do not, because you actually have to have a hair in it to make it active, if that makes sense. So when somebody's bald, their erector pili muscles are not working, or they're dead or whatever. So they actually don't get goosebumps wherever you don't have hair. And then sebaceous glands, what I would like you to highlight there, just the definition of sebum. So the sebaceous glands secrete a fatty or an oily substance called sebum. So yeah, that's going to be the oils that make your hair shiny. The same oil that comes out on the skin kind of throughout your day. You can see I'm a little bit shiny right here already. That's what that is. It's just going to be, they call it a lubricant for the skin. And then under the did you know portion, I just would like you to highlight that your body naturally contains or naturally produces 11 of the 20 amino acids, right? So that is like the third or fourth line down under there. Basically what they're saying is that a lot of the amino acids, right, link together and then they create a protein. And protein is what makes up a lot of the different parts of our body. So it's really important that you're eating protein-rich foods to make sure that your hair, skin, and scalp are all really healthy. So then over on 226, so the different structures of the hair shaft, we have the cuticle. So that's going to be that outside layer. We've talked about it before. It sits like shingles on a roof, like kind of going down, staggered a little bit, right? So this is going to be, if you want to highlight, it is the part of the hair that actually creates shine. And that's what gives hair that silky feel. So oftentimes if somebody has dry hair, their cuticle is probably open. Or, you know, like split ends. If you've ever like looked at a split end up close, it looks like a little palm tree. That's like the cuticle splitting out. So some ways kind of around, or not around, but kind of ways that we can help lay the cuticle down. Cold rinses after we shampoo. Really hot water actually blows the cuticle open. pH balancing shampoos and conditioners as well after a chemical service, very important to help kind of seal that cuticle down. Also a cold shot on the blow dryer at the very end of a blow dry service, because it's kind of the same thing. The hot air is what's opening up the cuticle, so then the cool air kind of like brings it down and makes it shiny. Sometimes what I'll do, you know, I'll like do the whole round brush thing, and then at the very end, then I'll go through and just do a cold shot everywhere, like a rough dry. And then of course things like product as well are going to really help too with the cuticle. At the bottom of that paragraph, or like I guess the middle bottom of that paragraph, highlight where it says a lengthwise cross section of the hair shows that although the hair cuticle scales overlap, each individual cuticle scale is attached to the cortex. So the cortex, which we'll talk about in a second, that's actually going to be like the center of the hair shaft. And then the cuticle, each little part, like if this is the cortex, right? Each like little layer of the cuticle kind of sticks, right? But they're all kind of overlapping, and that's what causes it to look like shingles. Other things too, as far as the hair, the cuticle goes, things like perms, whenever we raise the pH, that's another way that's going to actually open up the cuticle. So that's why with perms, when we are actually putting in the perming solution, we're bringing the pH up to like an 8 or 9 on the pH scale. And then when we neutralize it, we're actually trying to bring it back down to like a 4 or 5, which is where the hair wants to live, right? Same thing with color. Any kind of chemical service really is blowing up the cuticle. Raising the pH is what's going to open that. So over on 227, by where it says cortex, highlight where it says it is a fibrous protein core formed by elongated cells containing melanin pigment. So this is where we get our pigment from, and this is also where the strength of our hair shaft comes from as well. So all the changes that we might make to the hair, that's what's actually going to be affected is the cortex. Then we have the medulla. So not everybody is going to have a medulla. It's generally with people who have very thick hair and usually darker hair as well. It's going to be the center of the cortex. All male beard hair contains a medulla. So under learning about the chemical composition of the hair, highlight that first sentence. It says hair is composed of protein that grows from cells originating within the hair follicle. So the most common protein that we deal with as far as hair goes is going to be keratin. So keratin, we know we have keratin treatments, we have keratin products, things like that. You have to be very mindful with keratin products because it's good for hair that's damaged, right? So if you think back to the cuticle, right? So sometimes when that's a little dry or damaged, it'll almost be like potholes in a road. So what keratin does is it goes in and it fills all those potholes. keratin products, I should say. It goes in and it fills those potholes. And then eventually we start putting too much keratin on it, and it gives it more like a waxy texture over proteinized hair, because what's happening is the hair is actually got too much protein in it, and if you think of like a tube, if you fill it up with too much water, it's going to explode. The same thing kind of happens with your hair. So any kind of keratin products, shampoos, conditioners, things like that. Highlight 2 at the bottom of that paragraph, it says the hair shaft that emerge is a non-living fiber composed of keratinized protein. So technically when you say your hair's dead, everybody's hair is dead, because these are actually dead cells growing out of our head. It sounds kind of gross, but that's what it is. Highlight 2, hair is approximately 90% protein. Okay, so now here's the good stuff. Okay, so over on page 228, please highlight the definition of amino acids. So proteins are made of long chains of amino acids, which are units that are joined together end to end like pop beads. Like if you ever think about those like Mardi Gras necklaces, that's kind of what they look like. So then they form together and create what's called a peptide bond. And then we have multiple peptide bonds linked together, which then is a polypeptide chain. So highlight that one. A long chain of amino acids linked by peptide bonds is called a polypeptide bond. And then we have the protein. So proteins are long, coiled, complex polypeptide made of amino acids. The spiral shape of a protein is called a helix. So basically, that whole top paragraph, you might as well just highlight the whole thing because you need to know all those definitions. So if you break it down, right, amino acids is going to be the smallest, right? So then we have say we have like a whole row of amino acids going along, right? That is going to be a peptide chain. So then we have multiple peptide chains come together, right? And that's going to be a polypeptide chain. So then we have a super long polypeptide chain, and it's all wound up and going in all these crazy directions. That's what's creating the protein, okay? And then the helix is just the shape that it creates. So actually on the side there, on page 228, that's kind of what that helix shape is. So then we do have different types of side bonds. So basically that is just going to be the bond that actually keeps those polypeptide chains connected to each other. So we do have 3 different types that we talk about here. We have the hydrogen bond, we have the salt bond, and then we have the disulfide bond. So go ahead and highlight where it says the hydrogen bond. So this is going to be a weak physical cross-link side bond that is easily broken by water or heat. So then highlight as well where it says hydrogen bonds are broken by wet setting the hair with water. So this is going to be the bond that's affected when we do roller sets. This will be the one that you deal with when you have somebody who has curly hair and you smooth their hair out with a round brush. This will be the bond that's affected when you take somebody who has straight hair and you wet it down and then you braid it and they sleep with it overnight and they wake up and they have those waves. That's the bond that's being affected there, right? It doesn't take a lot to mess with it, but it's easily reset by just getting it wet, right? And then we have the salt bond, which is another weak link. This one's easily broken by the acidic solutions, like for example the ones that we might use in perms. This one is 1/3 of the hair's overall strength. And then we have the disulfide bonds. So this is going to be stronger than the 2 previous bonds, the salt and the hydrogen bond. So it's the strongest of the 3. And it's a little bit harder to break. This one's going to be broken with chemical services. So for example, permanent waves and relaxers when we're kind of going in and reshaping the texture of the hair. Normal amounts of heat can actually break this bond. which to me that means excessive use of heat. So say every day you're cranking it up to 400 on that flat iron and you're straightening the crap out of it, then yes, this is the bond that's going to be broken. I don't know if you guys have ever seen somebody who has curly hair and then they straighten it all the time and the curls are just so limp and it almost feels like whatever they do, they can't get their curls back. That's that bond that was ruined there, right? So it's important to note that when you do a chemical hair relaxing service, you break the disulfide bond and then it turns into what's called a lanthionine bond. And then this bond is actually, you can never take it back. You know what I mean? You can never reverse it. So once that disulfide bond is broken from a relaxer, their hair is straight. That's it. Can't go back to curly. Which is why we can't really perm the hair either after we've relaxed it, because it's just extremely damaging to the hair for that reason. So then over on 230, under hair pigment, highlight the definition of melanin, which is all natural hair color is the result of the pigment located within the cortex. Basically, melanin, all it is just super tiny grains all within the cortex, and they just kind of come together and create whatever hair color you have naturally. So then there's two types of melanin pigments. We have eumelanin, so if you want to highlight that, that is going to be the pigment that creates dark black hair. And then pheomelanin is going to be your blondes, your natural blondes and your natural strawberry blondes, things like that, redheads, right? It's going to, so if you just think like pheomelanin, like Phoebe from Friends is blonde, and then eumelanin is just the other one, dark. So of course, somebody who has gray hair, they're lacking those melanin pigments. So somebody who's younger is going to have those more of those darker pigments compacted, and then of course gray hair has less than that, and then white hair has absolutely none of it. So if you've ever seen somebody who's gray or aging hair, they'll have like salt and pepper. So some pieces might be dark and then some pieces are like kind of white. Those white hairs have absolutely no melanin left, but the gray ones still have a little bit in there. So then we have wave patterns. So this is going to be the actual shape that the hair strands create. So of course we have a scale. So we have straight, wavy, curly, and extremely curly, and you can fall anywhere on that scale. You can have some straight hairs and you can have some curly hairs. I have like loose waves in the front, but then I just get these like tight coils in the back. It's pretty nuts. Of course, anybody can have any type of hair. And like I said, it does vary. It can be different textures all throughout. A lot of times people will have straighter hairs in the front just because that's kind of the hair that we fry more. Those hairs tend to be a little bit more fine as well. And then the back, they get like coarse and curly. I've noticed that people who have a wave to their hair, usually the tightest curls are right in the back. I've found that the curls are looser in the front. So what actually determines the shape? It is just a theory, but they think that the actual shape of the cross section of the hair strand is what determines the shape. So basically the cross section, right? If this is your hair shaft, if you were to look at it directly on, whatever that shape is what your hair type is, your wave pattern. So the more flat and oval that wave pattern or that cross section is, the curlier your hair is supposed to be, they're suggesting. And then of course the more circular and round it is, then it's going to be straight. And they do have a picture of it right at the bottom here on 231 if you guys want to reference that. So really quick, just about curly hair, it does have a tendency to, it's more likely to be dry, it's more likely to get damaged, it's more likely to tangle. It's just a lot, it's harder to deal with, I think, for most people. So with curly hair, you just have to think, somebody who has straight hair, they often find their hair gets greasy quicker because the oil kind of just slips down it like it's a slide, whereas curly hair, though that oil, like that natural oil from the scalp, can't just like slide down the hair, right? It has to travel its way down the curl. So those oils never make it to the end of the hair, right? So those ends are always going to, not always, but in most cases, they're going to be dry. So we just have to be extremely cautious with curly hair and just make sure that we're always recommending proper products for our clients. I know DevaCurl is under, well, they were under heat a couple months ago, but their Heaven and Hair mask, swear by it. It saved my life. It saved my hair. I did make a curly hairstyling video for my new juniors if you want to watch that, okay? So on 232, highlight the definition of vellus hair. So it is a short, fine, unpigmented, and downy hair that appears on the body. So that's going to be the hairs on your arm. For women, they get peach fuzz. Anywhere really where the hair is not coarse. So then, of course, we do have terminal hair. So instead of it being the soft, downy hair, it's going to be that coarse, thick hair. It's going to be this hair, your eyebrow hair, leg hair, that beard hair on guys, right? So anything that's not the soft hair pretty much is going to be terminal. Also, too, all hair follicles are capable of producing either the vellus or the terminal. Just depends, obviously, on things like your gender, genetics, any kind of hormonal issues. For example, women who deal with PCOS, I think, they get that. Sometimes they can get coarse facial hair where their hair is normally that vellus hair, right? So then we'll jump into the growth cycles of the hair. So growth cycles of the hair. So we have 3 phases. So the first phase is going to be the anagen phase. This is just when the new hair is produced and it starts growing. One thing to note, so everybody has different lengths for their anagen phase. So some people have really long ones and some people have short ones. So depending on the length of your anagen phase, that's actually going to determine the length of your hair. So you might hear a client say to you, for example, oh, I haven't gotten my hair cut in like 5 years and it's been the same length this whole time. That just means they have a really short anagen phase. And unfortunately, that's as long as their hair can get. Some people will have hair down to their tush. That just means they have a very long anagen phase, right? So unfortunately, there's not anything that we can do to increase or decrease it. Obviously, somebody who is younger is going to have a faster anagen phase than somebody who's older. So the younger you are, the faster your hair will grow. On average, your hair should grow about 1/2 inch a month. I feel like that's kind of a stretch. I feel like 1/4 inch is normal for most people, depending on diet and things like that. Genetics as well is going to play a factor. So that's going to be the actual phase where the hair is growing, right? So then we have the catagen phase. This is going to be the phase where the bulb is actually kind of released from the source where it's growing. It's not shedding, it's still in the follicle, right? But it's just detaching from the supply. This is a very short phase and it usually only lasts 1 to 2 weeks. And then we have the telogen phase. So if you want to highlight that definition, it is also known as the resting phase and is the final phase in the hair cycle and lasts until the fully grown hair is shed. So until that hair actually comes out, whether it's brushing or in the shower, whatever, it's still in the telogen phase. So then once that hair is shed, then it goes right back into the anagen phase and continues growing. So on average, for a typical person to go through the whole growth cycle, usually takes about 4 to 5 years, they're saying, and then they start over. All the follicles on your head are at different stages of the cycle, right? So that's why when you get in the shower, you know, or you run your fingers through, you grab a hair on your way out. Yeah, could you imagine if all your follicles were at the, oh my gosh, you'd be bald every 4 to 5 years. That would be very unfortunate. There's not really anything proven that can make your hair grow faster or thicker, except for I can't say it, minoxidil, which really that's for somebody who is thinning. All that does is kind of thickens up the hair that you have. I mean, I take biotin and sometimes prenatals too, I've heard help people grow their hair. I personally feel like I notice a difference when I take vitamins to help my hair grow, but I don't know if that's just like a placebo effect or what. But just so you know, there is no really proven way to make your hair grow faster besides a healthy diet, drinking plenty of water, genetics, things like that. In the book, they do say that gray hair is, the myth is that gray hair is coarse and more resistant, and they're saying that's not factual. Their reasoning for that is that the white hair is just more noticeable. But I disagree with that, I'll be honest, because I've had clients who in some areas pick up the color perfectly, and then other areas they'll still have like the grays, right? Especially around the hairline, I do find that hair tends to just be a little bit more resistant for whatever reason, especially the white hair. So hair loss and hair loss treatments, right? So I had a client one time, this was when I first started doing hair, and her mom calls the salon and she's like, my daughter's hair hasn't been growing, it's been falling out, and she's upset. And she was only like 20, 21 at the time, and whatever. So she comes in, and yeah, it was a very upsetting situation for her, and I could tell it had an effect on her self-esteem, because she kept showing me pictures of when her hair was a lot longer and thicker. So what I ended up doing was just a scalp treatment for her. It was like a special cleansing. I think it was like one of the Nioxin treatments or something. I can't quite remember. But basically what I'm getting to here is that it is a very uncomfortable and kind of breaks your heart situation to see as a hairstylist. So for men, of course, traditionally, they don't wear makeup like women do. So when they start to thin or lose hair, it makes them a little bit self-conscious. And then for women as well, when they start to thin, then they feel self-conscious as well. Just because, again, that's just something that people, their hair makes them feel attractive, So when they start to thin out, especially if they used to have super thick hair, it's very upsetting. This can cause people to feel less assertive, less successful. And of course, this is just kind of like the self-esteem part of it, but it is very upsetting for clients. And, when they're losing hair, they're like, oh man, I'm getting old. And then that opens a whole nother can of worms that can be upsetting. So it's just not fun to deal with, right? So, I mean, we do have options for balding, thinning clients. Nioxin. I don't hear a whole lot of people talking about it anymore, but I do know that I've seen it work for people. So Nioxin is a product, it's not going to cure your hair loss. It's going to take the hair that you have left and it's going to plump it and then cause it to look thicker and then kind of fill in those gaps a little bit. But as soon as you stop using it, your hair does go back to looking thinner. So, and Nioxin products are expensive. So as long as your client's willing to keep investing in those products, right? For men, we have the toupees. You guys will probably see a lot of those barbering videos where they like shave the horseshoe portion and then they put the toupee on, and then they give them a cool haircut and it blends perfectly like it's their real hair. That would be an option for men. For women, or somebody who has long hair. Extensions, I would just be mindful with extensions. They're gonna obviously weigh on the hair depending on what type of extension you use. If it's really any type of extension, it's going to cause some stress to the hair that's left. So depending on how fine their hair is and how much is left, I would just, that's kind of like a case-by-case thing. But that would be a solution as well for that. Yeah, so alopecia is just kind of when your hair starts falling out. So we have androgenic alopecia. So terminal hair turns to vellus hair. Can be genetics, things like that. This is also going to be male pattern baldness. So the horseshoe that they might get at the top would be a form of alopecia. We have alopecia areata. This is going to be caused by some type of autoimmune. So usually, okay, so alopecia areata is going to be kind of patches around. They still have some areas where their hair is long and growing or whatever, but they're going to have like just random little bald spots, whatever. But then eventually, as it progresses, it turns into alopecia totalis. So that's just going to be when it's all gone. And then complete hair loss everywhere, vellus hair and everything is going to be alopecia universalis. Okay. Alopecia, if somebody experiences it, usually starts in their childhood, unfortunately. And sometimes it's just caused by like genetics, and it will just kind of happen with whatever. And that's really sad because they had nothing even triggered it. So a lot of alopecia clients, I do find, wear wigs. So unless you work at a wig salon or specialty salon, you probably won't run into it too much. But what you might run into if you work in a traditional salon is going to be postpartum alopecia. So of course, everybody's body is different, right? Some women do lose their hair, some don't. Normally what happens, women get pregnant and then they grow their hair long and thick and it's beautiful and they have that pregnancy glow, and then they have the baby and then their hormones are just out of whack, and then they start shedding hair like crazy, and they'll be like, oh my gosh, my hair is coming out in clumps. And that's, again, another very upsetting situation because they probably feel like crap because they just carried a baby. And they probably are tired from taking care of a baby. And, I don't know. I've never had a baby, so I don't know what it's like. But I've seen enough people to know that it does not always seem like a good time after you have a baby. So then, of course, on top of all that, now their hair that they just grew so beautifully long is thinning out, and now they're very upset. Usually it takes about a year for them to kind of get back into how their hair used to be. With postpartum clients, you just really gotta cater to them and just make them feel really, really special, because again, it's just not always a fun time, and they're probably really tired, and now they feel ugly because their hair is falling out. That freaked me out. Okay. So just remind them of that. Just be like, hey, like we're gonna get through this, right? Just be there for them. So then yeah, we kind of already talked about hair loss treatments there. So then different hair disorders of the actual hair, right? So we have Cantonese. So this is going to be the technical term for gray hair. I have a couple gray clients that I either helped them transition to gray or I met them while they were transitioning to gray. And I found that they all love it. They love being gray, and they get compliments everywhere they go. I've been doing this one lady's hair for like 4 years or so. Probably good 4 years. And she's always like, oh my gosh, everybody just loves my gray hair, and they're always like asking me who does their hair, and I say that the color's natural, but that you cut it, and I'm like, oh, thanks, Fran. So yeah, gray hair is definitely coming back in style, not back in style, but it's definitely in style, right? For women to grow it out. There is congenital Cantonese, so it's going to be there when you're born, if that makes sense. So if you guys know who Stacy London is, she has that like gray streak right in the front of her face. That is Cantonese. She's obviously not gray all over, right? Also, too, in albinos, they're gray. Like, they don't have any pigment in their hair. So, we have ringed hair as well. So, that's going to be bands throughout the hair that are gray. We have hypertrichosis. So, this is going to be an abnormal growth of hair. So, for example, like I was saying, women who might experience PCOS, they might get darker hairs where their hair is normally peach fuzz. We have trichotillomania. That is the technical term for split ends. This is technically a disorder. Technically, there's no way to, once the hair is split, it's split. You can't put it back together. You can temporarily seal it with like a keratin treatment, right? But it's really the only true way you're going to get rid of split ends is if you cut them off. And that's what we tell clients. We don't always listen to that ourselves. Highlights where it says moniliothrix. Moniliothrix is the technical term for beaded hair. This is just dry hair that's kind of like, it beads. They have areas where it's really thin and areas where it's not super thin. And then fragilita cranium is a technical term for brittle hair. You're going to want to highlight that as well. So this is, again, going to just be like damaged or split hair that you might be dealing with, right? So then disorders of the scalp. So we have dandruff. So if you want to highlight the definition, pityriasis, the technical term for dandruff, which is characterized by the excessive production and accumulation of skin cells. So a good dandruff shampoo is the Matrix Biolage. Also, too, if it's really bad, a doctor can prescribe a special medicated shampoo for it. With dandruff shampoos, it's very important that you make your clients aware that just because they had dandruff once doesn't mean they need to constantly use the dandruff shampoo, or else it'll come back. It's kind of like they only need to use it when the condition is flaring up, if that makes sense. So then highlight as well underneath, it says, although the cause of dandruff has been debated for many years, current research confirms that dandruff is the result of a fungus called Malassezia. All it is just excessive skin cell growth, right? And this can be a number of factors: hygiene, stress, age, hormones, things like that. Antifungal shampoos and conditioners will work. Anti-dandruff shampoos will work. Tea tree shampoo, I've heard, work well for clients. Very important that you learn the difference between what dandruff looks like and what lice looks like, because a lot of times students or stylists will be like, oh, is this dandruff or is this lice? So dandruff is going to be different shapes and sizes. Every flake is going to be different, whatever. Lice is very uniform and it's actually like kind of attached to the strand, right? So just be aware of that. And dandruff is not contagious, okay? So then we have the fun stuff. So over on 240, highlight pityriasis stadiatoides. It is a more severe case of dandruff characterized by an accumulation of greasy or waxy scales mixed with sebum that sticks to the scalp in crusts. When this condition is accompanied by redness and inflammation, it is called seborrheic dermatitis. It just causes the scalp to be itchy and irritated. We did talk about it kind of in chapter 8. So anti-dandruff shampoo will work for people with mild cases, but if you were to run into somebody with the really thick crusts, I know that's not super fun to think about, but you would want to refer them to a physician so that they could get prescribed that dandruff medicated shampoo. So then fungal infections. So we have tinea. Highlight that is the technical term for ringworm. It is characterized by itching scales and sometimes painful circular lesions. Tinea capitis. So this is going to be ringworm of the scalp. You may have heard tinea pedis. That's going to be from pedicures, so on the foot. We do have tinea barbae. This is going to be little bumps on the skin, can be caused from clippers, right? Those little bumps that we might get. And then we do have tinea fuvosa. So again, crust-like scales on the scalp, which are called scutula. We do also have parasitic infections. So, of course, scabies, lice, nits, which are the lice eggs, we might possibly run into. So, like I was saying, dandruff is going to be different shapes and sizes, and it's going to be flaky, whereas lice is going to be little, like, uniform tear-shaped guys all on the hair strand. So what I want you guys to highlight on 241 pediculosis capitis is the infestation of the hair and scalp with head lice. So very important with a client, if they have lice, you don't want to service them, of course, because you don't want to get lice running around the salon, right? So the biggest thing with that, I always say, is just make the client, like, don't make them feel weird, because they're probably already going to feel really gross and bad about themselves for having lice on their head, and it's going to make it a lot worse if you're like, oh my gosh, you're nasty, go get out of here. Just say to your client, like, hey, I think you might have lice. I can't, do the service today. Why don't you get it cleared up? Recommend that they can go, I think there's a place over either on Oregon, I think it's Oregon Pike, called Lice Lifters. You could send them there and they can get treated for it there. Or if they want to tackle the problem on their own at home, they would have to go to like CVS or something and get like a lice removal kit. And then of course they have to like disinfect their entire house. So just say to them like, hey, why don't you take care of this situation? I want you to come back. I'll take care of you as soon as you get it cleared up. Why don't you come back and reschedule them and whatever. Come back in 4 weeks. Usually it takes 2 to 3 weeks to clear the problem up, okay? So then we have our bacterial infections. So over on 242, highlight a furuncle is the technical term for a boil or acute localized bacterial infection of the hair follicle that produces contact pain. Okay, they do have a picture of it at the top there. It's just like kind of like a big pimple. And then a carbuncle is the inflammation of a sebaceous tissue caused by staphylococcus. So very similar to the furuncle, but larger. And like I said, they do have a picture right there. It kind of looks like a pimple. And then we have folliculitis as well. This is going to be an infection of the hair follicle. It's going to be raised. This needs medical attention. You don't want to service somebody who has this, right? You don't want to service anybody who has either of these three, just because it's gonna get irritated and then they're gonna be like, what the heck? So just, when in doubt, don't service them, right? And I know we talk about all these disorders like they happen all the time and we see them often, but we really don't. Really, to be honest with you guys, right? We see a lot of people, and most people don't have these conditions or things that we might have to worry about, that we deal with day to day, but occasionally you will come across somebody. For example, I probably have told you guys this story before in class. I can't remember who has heard it and who has not heard it, but I worked at one of those salons in the mall back in the day when they were open, and this lady comes in and she wanted, first of all, it was like 7 o'clock at night and the store was only open till 9. And honestly, the lady was asking for a really big project and I kind of just didn't want to do it. And I was young. I was like 18. I had just started doing hair. I wanted to go home. It was one of those days. Like, I just didn't have a lot of clients, whatever. So this lady comes in, she's asking for a project, and I'm like, okay, well, it's going to be easier to do the haircut first. So I start shampooing her, and then this crust that we talked about previously was all over her scalp. And had I been an experienced stylist, I probably would have handled the situation a lot better. But my manager wasn't there, and it was just me and my friends closing together. So we were all like, 18, 19, 20 years old. None of us knew how to handle the situation. So I cried because I didn't want to tell the lady that I didn't think I could service her. And anyway, long story short, how I should have handled that situation was just like, hey, lady, I'm not sure what's on your scalp, and I'm not sure if it's something that needs medical attention. I'm not sure if I can service you today because of that. And I'd rather, it would have been an unfortunate situation anyway. But, basically what happened was I got written up for it. So, learn from my mistake and don't do that. Just be polite and don't make them feel bad for having stuff that they don't necessarily have control over, right? Okay. Anyway, performing scalp and hair analysis. So this is typically done during the consultation. I do this step while they're talking. I'm kind of inspecting their hair and just seeing like, hey, what do they, got going on in here, right? So then we have hair texture. So this is going to be the thickness or the diameter of the hair strand. We've talked about this before. That's going to be coarse, medium, or fine hair. So over on 243, coarse hair texture has the largest diameter. And then highlight where it says it is often more resistant to processing than medium or fine hair. So it usually requires more processing when you are applying products such as hair lighteners, colors, permanent waving solutions, and chemical hair relaxers. So you will find that somebody who has fine hair can get lifted to a nice blonde pretty quickly versus somebody who has coarse hair, right? Medium texture is going to be pretty standard. That's like this kind of hair. And then of course fine hair is going to be the smallest diameter. This is very fragile hair. So with it, you just have to be mindful that you're not letting lighteners sit on the hair for too long, etc., etc. On page 244, highlight the definition of hair density. So this is actually, the texture, right, is the thickness of the strand, but then density is actually how many hairs you have, right? So it's per square inch is how they determine it, and you can have a combination of the two. You can have fine, like thick hair, right, where you have lots of it. You can have coarse, thin hair, so you have very coarse strands, but you have very few of them, right? So they come in all kinds of combinations there. So then we have hair porosity. So highlight that definition. The ability to absorb moisture. So hair with low porosity, if you want to highlight this, is resistant. Chemical services performed on hair with low porosity require a more alkaline solution than those on hair with high porosity. So somebody who has low porosity, it's going to take their hair longer to dry than somebody who has high porosity. Because if you think about it, so if the hair is dry, right, they're typically more porous, and their hair wants that moisture more, so they suck up any like water that they can get. So you'll often find that the ends of your hair dry first before the scalp, because this is where the hair is least porous, right? Also too, with like teenagers who maybe have never had their hair colored before, their hair takes forever to dry because their hair is just so like low and porous that it doesn't like, just the moisture just sticks. Like it doesn't, yeah. It just takes forever to dry. And then we have elasticity. So this is going to be the hair's ability to stretch without breaking. So healthy elasticity, the hair should be stretched 20%, right? And when it's wet, it should be able to stretch 50% without breaking. Obviously, somebody with damaged hair or dry hair, if their hair snaps, then it's not very good elasticity, right? And that's something you can just take, like if you just take a strand and just kind of stretch it out, and then, fairly easy. So then we have the different hair growth patterns. We have a hair stream. We have hair whorls. Those are going to be like calyx in the back. Those are just going to create different patterns throughout. Very annoying. So the hair stream usually is going to be the hairs going down in one direction, right? So that's pretty typical all throughout the head. It was the hair going all in the same direction. A whorl, most people do have it, even women, but you typically see it on guys because their hair's typically shorter. But that's just that little swirl in the back, right? But women have it too. It's just that their hair's long, so you can't really tell. And then of course we have calyx too, which is just going to be a circular, basically a whorl in the front of the hair, right? Most people, I have a calyx. I think, yeah, right here, because you can see it bumps. I have to straighten it out, but it does try to bump up, whereas this hair on the side lays a lot nicer. So then dry hair and scalp can be treated with different products. Same thing with oily hair and scalp. So with dry hair and scalp, we usually need a moisturizing shampoo and conditioner. Oily hair and scalp, we need something a little bit more clarifying. So yeah, I feel like as long as we know how to take care of our clients' hair, they're going to be happy and they're going to keep coming to us. So this was a very long chapter. My thing says it's an hour now, but yeah. So if you guys have any questions, please reach out to me. I know this is really crazy that we're still quarantined, but gotta do what we can, right? So thanks for